It started as a simple family dinner. At least that's what my wife, Caroline, called it. She had suggested it a week prior, her voice light and cheerful as she mentioned how long it had been since we all sat together for a proper meal. I had agreed without a second thought, assuming it would be like the dozens of other times I had taken my family out. Pleasant enough, if predictable. That evening, I walked into an upscale restaurant, the kind where the menus didn't display. Prices and the chandelier cast a soft golden glow over everything. The air smelled of seared meat, rich sauces, and old money. Caroline walked beside me, her heels clicking against the polished marble floor as she smiled at the host. My parents were already seated, along with my younger brother Eric and my sister, Melissa. I had spent my whole life being the dependable one, the responsible son, the older brother who always had things figured out. My family depended on that. They counted on my generosity, on the fact that I would always pick up the check, always ensure everything went smoothly. And up until this moment, I had never questioned it. The evening started light. My typically frugal parents seemed unusually enthusiastic about ordering fine wine and imported entrees. Melissa, who had never once turned down the chance to take advantage of my generosity, flipped through the menu with the enthusiasm of a child in a candy store before selecting the most expensive seafood platter available. Eric, grinning, ordered multiple appetizers alongside a dry-aged steak. I said nothing. I simply watched as they made their selections, my fingers absent-mindedly tracing the edge of the menu in front of me. I had always paid for these meals. It was an unspoken expectation, a responsibility I had never questioned. Until now, as I glanced over my options, debating whether to go for something simple, Caroline leaned in, her voice light but edged with something sharper. "Oh, don't be shy, honey. After all, you're just the wallet." Laughter erupted around the table. Melissa chuckled, Eric grinned, and my parents nodded knowingly, as if she had simply voiced something they had all thought, but never said aloud. I felt something shift inside me, a quiet, simmering realization. They didn't see me as a family member. I was a function, a bank account, a resource to be exploited. I calmly folded the menu and placed it down, my movements deliberate, controlled. Then, without saying a word, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I tapped a few times, placed a quick call, and then slid the device back into my jacket. Caroline must have noticed something in my expression because her smile faltered slightly. "Where are you going?" she asked, still grinning, though there was a hint of confusion in her eyes. I buttoned my jacket, straightened my sleeves, and looked her dead in the eye. "You'll find out soon enough." And with that, I stood up, turned, and walked out of the restaurant, leaving them to their feast. I didn't rush. I didn't look back. I simply left. I stepped into the crisp evening air, inhaling deeply, as if shaking off the weight of years of silent obligation. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I ignored it. I knew exactly what was about to unfold inside that restaurant. For the first time in my life, I wasn't their safety net. I wasn't their wallet, and I was done playing that role. I drove home in absolute silence. The weight in my chest wasn't anger, nor was it guilt. It was something else, something quieter, a realization that had been creeping toward me for years but tonight had finally caught up. They had never respected me. They had never seen me as their equal, let alone as family. I was a resource, a walking, talking wallet. And that smirk on Caroline's face when she had said it, that had been the final straw. As I pulled into the driveway, I felt my phone buzzing again in my pocket. I ignored it, letting it vibrate against my leg as I stepped out of the car. The house was dark, the kind of stillness that usually meant peace. But tonight, it felt different. It felt like the quiet before a storm. I walked inside, kicked off my shoes, and sank into the couch. My phone, still buzzing, now sat on the coffee table. I glanced at the screen, but I didn't need to check the messages. I already knew what they said. Then, the flood began. The first text was from Caroline. "Come back. Stop being dramatic." Then Eric. "Dude, what the hell are you doing?" Melissa followed right after. "You're really going to make Mom and Dad pay for this?" And then my mother. "Son, don't do this. This isn't fair." Fair. That word made me scoff. When had anything about this arrangement ever been fair? The buzzing stopped for a few moments, replaced by the chime of an incoming call, Caroline. I let it go to voicemail. Not even 10 seconds later, another call, Melissa. Then my father. I leaned my head back against the couch, exhaling slowly, feeling strangely at peace for the first time in a long while. They were panicking now, scrambling because, for the first time, their golden goose had walked away from the table, and they were left holding the bill. Then my phone lit up again. This time, it wasn't a family member. It was the restaurant. I chuckled as I picked up, already knowing exactly what the call was about. "Sir, we received notice that you placed a hold on the bill. Your party has been informed. They're not happy." I imagined the scene at the restaurant, the way their smugness must have melted into panic when the waiter informed them that the meal wasn't going to be covered by me. The glances exchanged, the rising tension, the moment they realized someone would actually have to pay for what they had ordered. "I imagine they aren't," I replied, my tone smooth and easy. The manager cleared his throat. "Would you like to authorize the payment now or no?" A brief pause. "Understood, sir. Your party has been notified. Have a good evening." I smiled as I hung up. For the first time in years, I was not responsible for them, not their financial crutch, not their fool. And it felt damn good. It was the shift. No more pretending I was overreacting. No more playing it off as a joke. Now she was upset because, for the first time, they had been the ones humiliated. I set my phone down and stretched, exhaling as I took my time getting up. It was a Saturday morning, and for once I didn't feel obligated to do anything for anyone. The house was quiet, peaceful. I had always been a man of responsibility, the dependable one, the one who made sure everyone was taken care of. But last night had been a wake-up call, a loud, unavoidable realization. I had been a fool for far too long. I made my way to the kitchen, pouring myself a cup of coffee as I mentally replayed the chaos that had unfolded at the restaurant. I could still picture their faces, the moment the waiter placed that check on the table and none of them knew what to do. The sheer panic in Caroline's eyes when she realized she didn't have a backup plan. Melissa's entitlement crumbling into disbelief when her card declined. Eric's desperation as he scrambled for a solution. And my parents, the ones who had always acted like their financial dependence on me was somehow expected, watching them struggle to process the reality that, for once, I wasn't their safety net. That had been priceless. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was Melissa. "You're a selfish bastard. You let Mom and Dad go through that." And here came the guilt trip. "You had no problem paying for us all these years. Now suddenly you're too good for it?" "No, Melissa. I wasn't too good for it. I was just done with it." I took another slow sip of coffee before finally picking up my phone and responding with a single text. "How did you all get home?" 3 dots appeared immediately. What the hell does that mean? "Well, I assume someone had to cover the bill, right? That's not the point." So they didn't cover it. Someone bailed them out. That only made my curiosity grow. "So, who saved you this time?" It took a little longer for her to respond. "Dad called Uncle Rich," I burst out laughing. "Uncle Rich?" That made everything even better. My father had always been too proud to ask for help from his brother, despite the fact that Uncle Rich was the wealthiest member of our extended family. He had spent years acting as though accepting money from anyone else was beneath him. And, yet, when the bill landed in his lap, he suddenly had no problem making that call. The irony was delicious. Melissa's next text came quickly. I hope you're proud of yourself. You humiliated us in public. No, I typed back. I didn't humiliate. You did that yourselves. No response. I leaned back against the counter, enjoying the way the tide had turned. For years, I had been the one they leaned on, the one expected to fix everything, to pay without question, to never complain. The moment I set a boundary, they had unraveled completely, and I was only getting started. By mid-afternoon, my phone rang again. This time, it was my mother. I debated ignoring it, but something told me it would be satisfying to hear what she had to say. I answered, keeping my voice calm. Hello, Mom. She let out a deep sigh. Son, this isn't like you. What isn't like me? I asked, feigning innocence. Turning your back on your family, acting like we're just some burden to you. I let out a slow breath. I haven't turned my back on anyone. I simply decided that I'm no longer an ATM. That's not fair. No. What's not fair is that for years I have paid for everything without a single complaint. And last night, when Caroline called me just the wallet, everyone laughed. No one defended me. No one even thought to cover their own damn meal. Silence. Then she spoke again, her voice softer. We just assumed, you never said anything before. Exactly, I said. I never said anything because I thought family meant support. But I realize now, to all of you, family meant I was supposed to provide and shut up about it. She sighed. We didn't mean to make you feel that way, son. Then why are you only apologizing now? After I finally walked away? More silence. I could picture her standing in her kitchen, holding the phone with a frown, realizing that for the first time in my life, I wasn't bending. This doesn't have to be like this, she tried again. No, it doesn't. But that depends on whether you all can accept that I'm done being your financial safety net. So what? You're just going to cut us off? No, Mom, I'm just not going to be used anymore. She didn't like that answer. I could hear it in her measured breathing, in the way she hesitated. Well, she finally said, I guess we'll see what happens. I guess we will. And with that, I ended the call. I sat in the quiet, taking in the moment. My entire life, I had been conditioned to believe that my role in the family was to provide, to handle things, to never make waves. But now I was rewriting the rules, and judging by the panic in their voices, they didn't know what to do without their free ride. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control, and I had no intention of going back. Melissa shifted uncomfortably. My mother sighed, rubbing her forehead. Caroline glared. So that's it then? She asked. You're cutting us off? I exhaled, my voice steady. No, Caroline, I'm just not letting you take advantage of me anymore. She stared at me, and for a brief moment, I saw something flicker in her expression. Not regret, not remorse, fear, not because she had lost me, but because she had lost control. Without another word, she turned on her heel and stormed out of the house. Melissa followed, muttering curses under her breath. My parents lingered for a second longer, but when I didn't move, when I didn't fold, they finally turned and left as well. I stood there, watching them walk away. For the first time in years, I felt free, and I had no intention of ever going back. The house was quiet again. I stood by the door for a long moment, staring at the space where my so-called family had just walked out. My fingers curled into a fist before I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to relax. I had expected them to be angry, expected them to throw accusations my way. But what I hadn't expected was their absolute refusal to take responsibility for anything. They weren't mad at what they had done. They were mad because, for the first time, they had to deal with the consequences themselves. I turned away, walking toward the kitchen. But before I could even reach the coffee pot, my phone buzzed again. Caroline. I considered ignoring it, letting her rant into the void like I had the night before. But something told me this call would be different. I picked up. "I hope you're proud of yourself," she spat before I could even say a word. I leaned against the counter, my grip on the phone loose. "Good morning to you too, Caroline." "Don't play games with me," she snapped. "Do you have any idea how much damage you caused?" I raised an eyebrow. "Damage? You mean the fact that I didn't pay for dinner? Or the fact that you had to call Uncle Rich for help?" She was silent for a second too long. That was it. That was the real issue. Not just the embarrassment, not just the money, but the fact that my father had to swallow his pride and call the one person he never wanted to, owe anything to. "You humiliated us," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "You put your own family through that on purpose just to make some kind of point." "And what point do you think I was making?" "That you're selfish," she hissed. "That you don't care about us anymore. That money means more to you than family." I exhaled through my nose, closing my eyes for a second. "No, Caroline. The point was that you all assumed I'd pay without question. The point was that no one even considered pulling out their own wallets. You didn't hesitate to order the most expensive meals, but the second you had to deal with the cost, suddenly it was my fault for not covering it." She scoffed. "Oh, don't try to act like this is some noble lesson. You did this because you're bitter and pathetic. Because you wanted to punish us." "Punish you?" I asked, genuinely curious. "For relying on you," she snapped. "For expecting you to be there for your family. For trusting that you wouldn't just walk away when we needed you." I chuckled. "Caroline, let's be honest here. This wasn't about trust. This was about entitlement. You expected me to take care of you. To take care of all of you. And the second I didn't, you threw a tantrum." "You are my husband!" she screamed into the phone. "You're supposed to take care of me." There it was. Not us. Not each other. Just me taking care of her. "I think we have very different ideas of what a marriage should look like," I said calmly. "Oh, don't start," she spat. "You were fine with this arrangement before. You never complained when you paid for things, never once said no, but now you're acting like some kind of victim just because I made a joke." "A joke?" I repeated. "Caroline, you called me just the wallet." And everyone at that table laughed. "Do you know what that tells me?" Silence. "It tells me you all meant it." Her breath hitched slightly, but when she spoke again, her voice was laced with venom. "You're making a mistake." "Am I?" "You think you can just walk away from your responsibilities? From me? You think this little temper tantrum is going to get you anywhere?" I sighed. "Caroline, I don't owe you a life of luxury. I don't owe you unlimited meals at expensive restaurants. And I sure as hell don't owe your entitled family a single dime. If you think that's walking away from my responsibilities, then maybe you should take a good hard look at yourself." She was breathing hard now, seething. "You'll regret this," I smirked. "I doubt it." And then, before she could say another word, I ended the call. I wasn't playing this game anymore. I wasn't negotiating my self-respect. I wasn't explaining myself to people who had spent years taking advantage of me. I turned my phone off completely, tossing it onto the counter. And for the first time in a long, long while, I felt completely free. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. No calls, no texts, no angry knocks at my door. I should have felt relieved, but instead, a small part of me knew this wasn't over. Caroline wasn't the type to let things go. Neither was my family. They weren't just angry. They were losing control. And that meant they were planning something. I just didn't know what. Not yet. I crossed my arms, my voice laced with sarcasm. "That's rich, coming from the woman who stole 12 grand from me." The officer frowned. "She says that money was hers as well." I pulled my phone from my pocket and sighed. Let me make this simple for you, officer. With a few taps, I brought up the bank statement showing the unauthorized transfer. Then, I pulled up the text Caroline had sent me that morning. You froze the accounts? Are you insane? Do you even know what you're doing? I handed the phone over, watching as the officer's eyes skimmed the screen, his lips pressed into a thin line. He turned to Caroline. Ma'am, you didn't tell me there was already a fraud claim filed against you. Caroline's face went pale. That's not... She floundered, then clamped her mouth shut because she had nothing. Absolutely nothing. The officer sighed, rubbing his temple. Ma'am, I advise you to take this matter up in court. If there's a legal dispute, your lawyer can handle it, but from what I'm seeing here, your husband did nothing illegal. Caroline seethed, her face red, hands curled into fists. This isn't over, she spat. I smirked. Oh, I know. The officer handed my phone back. Sir, do you feel unsafe? Do you want her trespassed from the property? Caroline's head snapped toward him. What? I tilted my head, considering it. She glared at me, jaw tight. She knew if I really wanted to, I could make sure she never set foot in my home again. But no, not yet. She wanted a war. I was going to let her spiral first. No, officer, I said. I think we're good for now. His shoulders relaxed slightly. All right. Have a good night. As he walked back to his patrol car, Caroline lingered, waiting for me to argue, to fight. I just smiled and closed the door. I heard her scream in frustration on the other side. It was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. An hour later, my lawyer called. You're not going to believe what just happened, I said with a chuckle. Try me, he replied dryly. I filled him in. The stolen money, the police visit, the failed attempt to paint me as an abuser. He let out a low whistle. She's getting desperate. I know. Well, good news. The fraud case has been officially submitted, and since you provided evidence, the bank is already working on reversing the transaction. I grinned. That's beautiful. It gets better. I also filed the first set of divorce papers. She'll be served by the end of the week. Perfect. He sighed. You know she's not going to take this lying down, right? She's going to fight for everything she can get. Let her. I've played by her rules for too long. Now it's my turn. 2 days later, the email came in. The bank had reversed the transaction. My money was back. Caroline? She had nothing. Moments later, my phone rang. Caroline. I didn't answer. A voicemail popped up minutes later. I pressed play. Her voice was desperate. You have to stop this, please. I didn't mean to take the money like that. I thought you'd understand. I scoffed. Understand? She was only apologizing now because she had lost. I deleted the voicemail and sent a final text. You made your bed. Now lie in it. Then I blocked her number. For the first time in years, I was free. The divorce papers were officially filed. Caroline had been served. I expected an immediate explosion, a war of screaming voicemails, another police visit, maybe even a dramatic appearance at my workplace. But instead, silence. At first I thought she was plotting, biding her time. That was the kind of person she was. She never backed down from a fight, especially when it meant losing something she felt entitled to. But as the days stretched into a full week with no word, something in my gut told me she wasn't just planning. She was desperate. Then my lawyer called. She lawyered up, he said without preamble. I exhaled through my nose. Of course she did. It gets better. Amusement crept into his tone. She's claiming she's entitled to half of everything you own, plus alimony. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. Of course she is. Her attorney sent over the initial settlement request this morning. Let me tell you, buddy, She thinks she's walking away with the jackpot. I sat up straighter. How bad is it? Well, she wants half of your assets. She also wants monthly alimony payments because she claims you financially maintained her lifestyle and that she sacrificed her own career to support your marriage. I nearly choked. Sacrificed? She hasn't worked a single day since we got married. Yeah, I figured. But she's going to argue that her role as your wife meant she contributed in other ways. Like spending my money? Exactly, he said, and I could hear the smirk in his voice. I let out a slow breath, shaking my head. What's our move? We're rejecting everything outright. You have the bank records, the proof of fraud, the police report from her little stunt at your house. If she wants to fight this in court, she's going to lose badly. I